All right, hello everybody, and welcome to learning objective number 2 for topic 5.1. So we've talked about what we mean generally by property. So now we're going to look at our first class of property, the first version of property that we mean, and this is personal property. And bailments are not a kind of property, but a way that you hold on to personal property, which we'll explain in a minute. So, all right, here we go. All right, I will move myself up here again. Okay, so first of all, what do we mean by personal property? Well, it's pretty simple. It's pretty much everything that's tangible that's not land. There is some crossover. Sometimes you'll hear the term intangible personal property, but I think that's generally a misnomer. When you talk about personal property, it's all tangible items. Anything tangible that's not real estate. So you see here, I found this picture on the internet. This looks like a storage container with a bunch of junk in it. All of that's personal property, tangible personal property. And the building that it's in, the land that it's on, is real property and would not be considered personal property. So just think for our purposes, anything tangible, meaning that you can touch and feel, my reading glasses, my pen, my coffee cup, these are all tangible personal property, but the real estate and the buildings connected to the real estate are real property, which we'll cover next. Okay. Okay, so how do you acquire personal property? So, so slightly different rule for real property than for personal property. So when we think about tangible items, you have to think about how you acquire it. So if I go to the store and buy this pair of reading glasses, then I'm the owner of these reading glasses, right? I mean, I bought them, I own them, but I can't prove it. I have a receipt from the store somewhere, but there's no piece of paper, there's no title that tells you that I own this pair of reading glasses. Now, there are some kinds of tangible personal property that do have titles. An example would be a car. So when you buy a car, you get the title to the car. That's actually a piece of paper, and that paper tells whoever is asking that you own that car. And the reason for that is a lot of the times when you have a car, you're not in possession of it. When you park it in the parking lot and you go to school, you don't possess it at that moment. So it's possible to own cars and not possess them, but you still own them. Whereas with my reading glasses, if I were to drop them and somebody else picked them up, and we'll talk about this later, they would be the owner of it unless I could prove that they were mine. Okay, so possession has a lot to do with whether you own personal property or not, unless it's a kind of personal property that has title. Cars, airplanes, boats, other things like that tend to have titles. Okay, so when you sell personal property, you can only sell whatever it is you own. Oops, sorry. You can only sell whatever it is you own. So if you steal something and try to sell it, then whoever buys it doesn't acquire title to it because it was stolen in the first place. The seller, in that example, doesn't have the right to sell it because they don't own it in the first place. So the key rule here is that a seller of personal property can only sell whatever rights they have at the time that they sell it. Okay, manufacturing should be fairly simple. When you create something, you own it. So if you take some paper and you create some kind of something from it, then you own that item that you create. So I have this little cube of these are little notes with the bears on the side. So whoever manufactured this started off with some pulp, some paper, and some ink. And when they took that ink and that paper and they created this cube of notes, well, at the time they created it, when they manufactured it, they become the owner of this personal property. Now, what about the pulp and the ink What would happen if they didn't own that pulp and that ink? Well, the owner of that material has some sort of claim on this property if it turns out that they're not paid. So, but the owner of the property is whoever creates it. A cession happens when you add value. So if you were to, for example, acquire some property and you added onto it, you created more value, you own the additional value. And there's some examples sometimes where, let's say, somebody steals a boat and then they sell this boat to somebody who didn't know it was stolen, and then that person adds all kinds of upgrades to the boat. Well, when the original owner, if the original owner wants the boat back, then they don't get the freebie of the extra value. That is owned by the person who created, who added value, and that's called a cession. If it's there's rules for this, that if the accession, the value of the improvements exceeds the value of the item, then they just only owe cash back to whoever originally owned the item. They don't have to give the boat back, for example. Okay, but there are these many examples where if you buy something that's stolen, the original owner has a right to get that, to collect it back from you if they can prove they owned it. And then you have a claim against whoever sold it to you for the money that they sold it to you for, but you can't, the original owner does not have to reimburse you for that, whatever you paid. So it's important when you're buying things to make sure that you know that the seller owns them. It's also possible to acquire property by gift. So if someone gifts you an item, then that item becomes yours. So long as it was intended as a gift, it was delivered and received by the giftee, the person receiving it, and so long as that person accepted it. If you have those three elements, then the gifting transfers the title. So it is possible to own something after it's been given to you for free, so long as it meets those three standards. Okay, so bailment, I mentioned earlier, is a system of law that covers the temporary holding of a property of somebody else. So I have a picture here of an Apple computer, and so if you take your computer to the Genius Bar because it needs to be fixed, and they take it and say, we'll fix it and we'll have it back for you in a week, well, Apple doesn't own it because they possess it for that week, but they don't own it because they are holding it on your behalf. And in that case, you would be what's called the bailor. You're the person giving the item to Apple, and Apple is the bailee, and they hold it on your behalf. And so when that is the case, then Apple has an obligation to take care of it to a reasonable degree for you. Although you probably signed the little thing they make you sign when you hand it over, absolves them of some liability. But if your computer is in their possession and let's say the store burns down, then they're on the hook to give you a new computer usually. So that is why we care about it. But it's also a really important part of how property works. If we didn't have bailment, then every time you would never want to leave an item of personal property to somebody else to repair or to do anything else. There would be all kinds of, it'd be very difficult to transact if we didn't have bailment. So that's why it's important. Okay, so it's just a quick run through. Remember, personal property is basically everything that's tangible, but that's not real estate. And there's a variety of different ways that you can acquire personal property, but usually you acquire it just by buying it. And then if you hand possession over to somebody else in a situation where you're expecting it back, that would be called a bailment. And also, just quickly, remember we talked about agency, and remember how I talked about how agency affected lots of other things? Bailment is a form of agency. The bailor is the principal, the bailee is the agent. So it has the elements of agency that we talked about in that unit. Okay, that's all we have for now. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.